Good afternoon, everyone. I hope those of you who are on Washington time zone are having a good afternoon and had a chance to grab a little lunch in amidst all the exciting sessions that we're having today in the SID Washington first virtual conference. My name is Wade Warren. I'm the chair of the SID board, and I'm the chief strategy officer for international development at Deloitte Consulting. I am delighted to be here this afternoon with four of my colleagues to talk to you all about issues around reimagining development in a time of COVID, and also issues around social and racial justice, the things that are changing our sector. I'm going to have my panelists introduce themselves in just a moment, but I just wanted to say their names for you. We have Graham Couturier, who is with Equal Access, Bob Fries with ACDI-VOCA, Olivier Girard with Creative Associates International, and Michelle Laird with Apt Associates. We are going to have a good conversation, I think, over the next 55 minutes. I'm going to ask the panelists a few questions myself, and then we're going to open up for questions from the audience. So please use your chat function to ask any questions, and don't wait until the end when I call for questions. If things occur to you as we're speaking, just put them right in the chat box, and we have an organizer who will be curating them for me so that I can ask them a little later in the hour. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm really happy that we are able to pull this great panel of experts together. And let me ask you to each just introduce yourself briefly. Bob, if we could start with you.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Fries, and I'm with ACDI-VOCA. I manage a team of technical experts who support our projects from their respective technical areas of specialization. So we get a glimpse across our projects. Our goal is to be able to strengthen the delivery of our services on the projects, as well as to learn across them and to not reinvent the wheel and be more efficient. So this has been an interesting year to learn things across the projects.
Great. Graham, how about you next?
Good afternoon, everybody, or bon appetit for those of you who are still having your lunch so you can't see. I'm the Executive Vice President of Equal Access International. I'm based here in Washington. I support both our programs team and our business development team. We're in 15 countries around the world through 12 country programs, and I want to take a moment to thank Sid for the invitation. Thanks to Wade for having me on the panel. Really appreciate it.
You're certainly welcome. Michelle.
Hi, thanks very much, Wade. Michelle Laird. I'm Regional Managing Director of Asia, Middle East, North Africa at Apt Associates. And Apt, like my colleagues, we work in international development. We do work also in the US as well as abroad, and we work in over 50 countries. But as my title indicates, I'm focused on a particular region, and within there, I really oversee project development across a number of different sectors. We work in agriculture, health, climate change, clean energy, governance. I'll forget them all, but I'm really pleased to be here, really pleased to join this panel with my colleagues.
Great, thank you, Michelle. And Olivier.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Olivier. I'm the Chief of Party for Creative Associates of the USAID Office of Transition Initiative Nigeria Lake Chad Basin Program. I'm currently joining this call from Maiduguri in Northeast Nigeria. We are a stabilization counterinsurgency program working with the government and communities to counter the influence of Boko Haram and ISIS in the Northeast part of the country. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Olivier. You know, let me just say as an aside, one of the great benefits of having this conference virtually this year is that we can have people both as panelists and as participants from all around the world, which is not something that we've been able to do in the past. So I'm really glad you have been able to join us. I will also say, just as we get started, that there was a panel similar to this before lunch. We thought it would be very useful for listeners to learn more about what different implementing partners in the sector are doing during this time of COVID and lessons that they've learned. And we had so many people who volunteered to share their recommendations of what they've been doing that we split it into two panels. So we had a panel earlier before lunch and now this panel afterwards. And I think, it'll be interesting to compare some of the some of the observations that you have to the ones that were offered this morning. Let me go ahead and get started with the first thing that I wanted to ask you, and I think this first question is probably the most obvious one. We all work for organizations that have had to make significant operational changes since March, since the beginning of the isolation period due to the coronavirus. And, you know, most of us have shifted to working from home. I think that's worked out more successfully than many of us would have ever thought possible, although there are many challenges, of course, associated with working from home. And I think maybe more importantly, we've had to change the way we implement our programs overseas, and we've had to rely more on virtual delivery and more on using local actors. So I wanted to ask each one of you if you could offer us some recommendations or some lessons learned about how you've gone about programming in this new reality. And I'll start just in the same order that we did introduction. So Bob, maybe if you could start us off.
Sure. Yeah, I'd say there's kind of three lessons that have percolated over the last 6 months. Stretch your technology, really tap your engagement with local actors, and adapt. I can elaborate a little on those three. The technology, that even started at home. On March 10th, this house I'm in had 2 commuters heading to the office, and by March 25th, our internet service was handling my wife and me working online all day, along with a daughter and a son-in-law doing their jobs all day online, and a daughter managing a 5th grade classroom online, and a son trying to finish his university classes and start what we teased him and called an externship. And everything held up, which is a kind of reflection of our fears of the technology and our ability to work remotely with our projects, and our projects working remotely with their participants. But not only the use of technology in ways that we wouldn't, but thinking outside the box. Since March, I've seen colleagues and partners around the world train and support people remotely across many time zones. I've seen market information and extension services get distributed in new ways, from apps to radio broadcasts. We've seen an expanded use of electronic banking services, and we've seen e-commerce taps source materials from smallholders and reach peri-urban communities with their products. And I think one of the key lessons we saw, the projects that lean towards more of a facilitative approach, who had a rich engagement with a range of local actors, were the ones that were able to pivot most quickly and most effectively. They had the relationships with smallholder farmers, with rural residents, with larger companies and small firms, with associations, with universities, with government ministries, and the more of an integrated link they had to local actors, the more they were able to run with things. One of the services that helped set up was reaching out and getting data on what's happening, what is the impact, because there were these trusting relationships that have been established and channels to communicate across those local actors. That data was able to surface quickly, and it was used for advocacy, being able to say, hey, you are looking at what to do with relief packages in Honduras, and here's some information of what's happening, to get permits to the right people so that food distribution wasn't getting shut down, to look at the impact of closed borders on critical supplies. And those broad relationships also fueled adaptation. We saw the communications get safety protocols out. We saw COVID response grants that popped up that helped produce and distribute PPE to folks in multiple countries, and also to get private sector actors thinking and acting and moving in ways that were addressing the bottlenecks from a food security perspective. So I guess just to summarize, stretch that technology, really look not just at having local engagement at a particular layer, but in multiple layers, and have systems in place where you can adapt and change your work plan and change your business plan as a private sector player. Thanks.
That's great, Bob. Thanks. I told my wife a couple of times that I'm amazed that COVID hasn't broken the internet. I never would have thought that the infrastructure around the world would support so many people working virtually all at the same time. Graham, can you add on to that and let us know if you have some lessons learned and recommendations about this new environment that we're working in?
Yeah, definitely, and thanks, Bob. That's a really nice a nice frame. I think, to add on to that, I think, very early on, so we have 12 country programs around the world. We work a lot on peace building and CVE as practice area, governance, civic engagement, and then gender equality and social inclusion. And so much of our work is about sort of fostering dialogue and fostering the kinds of relationships that Bob is talking about. So as we sort of shut down at the very beginning all of our country programs, the offices, we immediately had this sort of really intensive process of essentially retooling all of our work plans. So I think we're kind of a communications organization. We work a lot with media, we work a lot with social media, we work a lot with sort of community engagement as well. And so finding ways to use technology, but also to maintain those relationships, to continue to foster those relationships in the midst of essentially not being able to have many of the activities was a challenge. But I think an organization of our size, so we're in 12 countries, we're sort of in the sort of $15 million a year range, and so we've had to be pretty scrappy to succeed in the way that we have prior to COVID. And I think we have a mix of field programs that have been around for 20 years and some that have only been around for a year or two. So I think we rely pretty heavily on the relationships that we developed both with stakeholders as well as among one another. And I think the biggest important thing was to really, with COVID, to really prioritize those communication channels. And I think, it was quite a challenge there, but we were able to record. We do a lot of radio programs, so record radio programs using WhatsApp, all kinds of dialogues. Certainly, we tried to very much get back to normal as soon as possible, but really did a lot of work, ensuring social distancing, which is very hard when you're talking about sort of being in a radio studio, or social distancing among 50 people in a stakeholder workshop. So figuring out ways to do a lot of that remotely has been a huge challenge. I think trying to maintain sort of understanding on one another is a real challenge. I think for those of us at headquarters, I think being the size we are, we only have 18 people in headquarters that have a staff of 220, 250 around the world. So we're covering a lot of different programs, but I think this was also a reminder of there's a necessity of really understanding granularly every aspect of how you're implementing work, because we had to really retool and re-implement, redesign essentially most of the activities that we did, and it forced those of us on the sort of support side to really offer our perspectives on how to do that. But the biggest lesson for me, I think, is something that has been made possible, I suppose. We work in a very high stress industry. There's a lot of competition, a lot of funding challenges. We work in parts of the world that are highly stressful. And I think that focus on sort of the human aspect of the work that we do, and also the human aspects of the people that certainly are employees and those that the stakeholders we work with. I've seen a greater willingness, certainly on organizations, to really prioritize opening up spaces for employee support and dialogues, open communication discussions, both about what's going on around the world from a social justice, racial equality standpoint, but also just to check in on people. And I think that if I could give one piece of advice, is to really, hopefully, as we pass this, to really maintain that focus, even when you don't have the requirement of having to focus the elephant in the room of a pandemic. So I just didn't want to get too far down the conversation without really prior to the human angle. So thanks.
Thanks, Graham. I appreciate that additional element. I think when we constructed this panel or this topic, we were thinking mostly about how to deliver differently overseas. But your point about taking care of staff needs at headquarters and in the field when people can't be with their colleagues and they're feeling isolated is a really, I think, an additional stressor and an additional challenge that we're all dealing with. So I appreciate that you raised that. Michelle, I turn to you next for maybe with two questions there. Like, what about overseas and what about headquarters, and what lessons are there for either of those?
Yeah, thanks very much, Wade, and Bob and Graham both. I echo their recommendations, and in fact, I think one of the first things I'd been thinking to say was, we're all in the business of doing good well, right? And what is well, and part of that actually it is the engaging, it's the listening, it's the caring. It's the caring for the people we work with day to day in the home office and in the site office, and also all of the beneficiaries, all of the actors. That's why we're doing what we do, and it's just been tremendously augmented during this pandemic when people are feeling isolated, and you don't realize how much you really rely on seeing people and being together with people and joining and as you do work, really engaging in other aspects of people's lives. And I think it really, I appreciate what you're saying, Graham. It's so important to continue that in different ways after the pandemic. And it's really important for us to continue to really to not lose sight of our development goals, of what we're working to achieve, because I think we've been very focused on this pandemic, and I think, as we'll continue to discuss, there are a lot of things we're trying to achieve, and we're trying to achieve it in new ways, and we really need to continue to listen to hear how we can best achieve those during these times. I think other lessons learned or recommendations might be, we've learned we can do more virtually than we ever realized. We are reaching out to people in different ways. And a benefit of that is we can actually be more inclusive, like today, right? We've got people from all over the world that can attend. And so we have to be careful about not being exclusive in terms of the digital technology, but we can be more inclusive and can reach more and do it in a more cost-effective way. I think Bob mentioned, let's hire good people in both in the home office, but in the sites. We have a lot of local teams, and that has really helped us to continue to work even while keeping people safe. Partner locally, trust your team, allow them to innovate. It's been our teams in the field that have really thought through, what can I do? How can I pivot? How do I reach people and really meet their needs, and then support them, right? From the home office, that's what we're there to do, is really to support them. Yes, we provide technical expertise, but we're there to facilitate and to allow the local teams to do their work and celebrate successes. We don't forget that during a time of great stress. We virtually celebrated Mango Festival Day in Luxor and Fennel Harvest Day in Kenya. And so we showcased the results, and it really brought a lot of joy to the farmers, to everybody. And people, it was the middle of the night, and we had people watching, to see what was happening on Mango Day. We also were able to sign an MOU between USAID Egypt and Giza Seeds and Herbs, which is a leading exporter of herbs and spices. And so the private sector is still working also. So continue to do the work, continue to see your goals, continue to celebrate successes, and really continue to listen and care. Thanks.
That's great, Michelle. Thank you. Olivier, first place, Olivier, don't worry. I'm not going to come to you last every time so that you have to kind of back clean up. But I am interested in your perspective on this, but particularly since you're based overseas and what this has looked like from the field perspective.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, from my perspective, I guess the first lesson is that, having a work culture centered on adaptability, flexibility, and speed is always useful. I haven't seen a scenario where that is not useful, and certainly it was during COVID. We're implementing an Office of Transition Initiative, an OTI program, which is a bit different than I guess normal USAID programming. We didn't have to rewrite a work plan. We started from one day to the next, we pivoted and we started doing COVID response activities. I think we cleared our first activity mid-March. And we ended up doing a lot of support, leveraging our government partners, our community partners. We had prior relationships with women that we endowed with livelihood support, and we asked them to start making masks, and they made hundreds of thousands of masks for IDPs and other people in the Northeast. And so actually for us, COVID was, we ramped up our programming because we continued our normal programming, and then we started doing COVID programming. So we became very busy. April, May, June were extremely busy months. And I think that helped us. It helped us psychologically. It gave us the strength to know that we were able to leverage the crisis to keep ourselves busy and do good things. And of course, we were able to do this because we also had invested in those online support systems before COVID, and we were using Teams and Zooms and all these tools. And so from a technical, as others have said, from a technical standpoint, having all of this in place before the crisis really made it easier for us to actually just focus on the work, and having our staff continue doing their jobs, even if they were working from home. And, my personal experience is that I stayed in Nigeria. My few other expatriate colleagues also stayed here. And I think it made a positive difference for me personally, not having to handle issues of relocation and whatnot, but also just for our staff and for a program to be able to just keep working, to keep answering the phone, be in the same time zone as the team. I wasn't able to travel because there was a ban on interstate travel for a few months, but just being there, even if you're from home, I think it had a positive impact on our partners, on our staff, and we were able to keep going without losing a beat. So I think, and for me, this is lessons learned and recommendations. I think our USAID colleagues did move back, and so we had our client in the US, we were here, our colleagues from Creative and HQ were at home. I think it did help blur the boundaries between, the traditional boundaries between field and HQ, between the deep field and the remote field locations and the capital, between us and USAID. We were all in this together. And I think, we often see in programs sometimes antagonistic relationships between HQs and the field. And I think that slows down decision-making speed. But I really appreciated having a more unified culture of communication, everybody using the same tools, connecting virtually every day, every week. And so I hope that's something that we'll be able to maintain in the long term once we're past the COVID pandemic. Thanks.
That's great. I'm sure none of us have any idea what you're talking about antagonism between headquarters and the field. But I appreciate that. And that's a very candid observation. And I think it's maybe one of the silver linings that's come out of this crisis. I wanted to turn. I have at least two more questions that I want to ask, and one is a little bleak, and then one is a little more hopeful. Let me do the bleak one first. There has been a lot published about losses to development progress as a result of the coronavirus, and I know all of us who work in development are worried about that. I want to ask each of you, and I'll start back with you, Olivier, first. Sort of, what are your fears? Like, what are your biggest fears about what this pandemic has done to our work and to development progress around the world?
Well, I work in this stabilization space, and so I tend to view the world with that lens. And, ISIS did not evacuate its leaders. It did not, institute work from home policies, and they were already wearing masks. They kept going, and I think that the Sahel region, where I've been working for the past few years, is more insecure than ever. And so I think for me, COVID is, of course, has depressed the economies of most of the developing world, and will do so for a while. But I think the security threat, the threat of this growing insurgency, across a number of countries, and the complete incapacity of the international community, the African governments to respond to this. I think that's the, I would say, the even longer term challenge, because I think we know for COVID sort of what the response will be, the medical response, where everybody's hoping for vaccine sometime next year. It may take a while to reach the developing world, but I think overall we have a sense that COVID itself, that the pandemic will be hopefully over in a year or two at most, but this larger challenge, I think it will make it, COVID makes it vulnerable at a time where this insurgency is growing, the space for us to do our work is shrinking, and that's what really worries our beneficiaries more than COVID. I mean, here in Nigeria right now, I mean, COVID killed about over 1,100 people. It's the official number. The real number is probably much higher, but I think most people are still more concerned about malaria and typhoid and getting killed by insurgents. So that's my fear, I think. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Olivier. Michelle, what about you?
Sorry, I had to unmute. You surprised me in the order. Yeah, okay, you mentioned that this is the bleak question and we'll have the happier question after, and it's true. Yeah, I can't believe I'm actually getting teary during a panel, but totally unexpected. But I think, impact on food security, small children's nutrition, education, things that we're seeing in the US and globally, I think that there's a real danger that they're big, there are long-term implications on that. We've definitely fallen back. There's been a phenomenal impact on poverty. There are articles out there about the new poor, people that were not anticipated to be poor in 2020 and beyond, but are, and devastatingly poor. Homelessness. I think that another, we can talk about the various SDGs, of course, goals 1, 5, 10 in trouble, we've got health in trouble. But another thing that I've noticed is that authoritarianism is on the rise. I think that in some countries where we work, as leaders have been able to clamp down, we've seen civil society far less free in many places. And that can really have a profound consequences for development in sectors beyond democracy and governance. So it really means that advocacy of critical voices aren't, those aren't being heard. So I think that's something we really need to focus on as well. I know we're short on time. I'm a little emotional, so I'm going to stop there and pass to my colleagues. But yeah, there's a lot of work. There's additional work to do now because of this pandemic.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's very authentic, actually. So don't worry about it at all. Before I turn to Graham, just a reminder to those of you, I understand there are about 120 or so people watching the panel, so I'm very happy about that. Please ask questions. Just put them in the chat box, and we will get to them in a little bit. Graham, how about you? What are you worried about?
Yeah, I think there's a pretty, not really nice bleak, but it's also a realistic picture of what's happening right now. And I think to the points that Michelle and Olivier made, I think this is, we Equal Access, we do quite a lot of work in closing civil society spaces. We do a lot of work, sort of alternative messaging work in sort of the arena of transforming extremism. And to Olivier's point, there's been just manipulation and quite a successful manipulation of the COVID-19 information around it, the realities around it, shutdowns around it. And I think seeing that no one is immune to that, everybody's been touched by that. I think, in this situation, to your opening remarks, Wade, a lot of us and a lot of organizations have been able to really do well and continue to move forward. I think the organizations that have done the best are those who've been able to pivot. I think we're going to have to be used to this for a little while and used to doing doing more with less. But I think my fear is that some of the authoritarianism that Michelle was talking about, that's touched us, very much here, where in the country I'm sitting in the United States, what effect that may have on funding outlooks for this kind of work. Because I think, there are certainly always will be and always have been doubters about this industry, and there's some organizations that do better than others. But I think what this last 6 or 8 months has shown is the necessity of this work. When Olivia was talking about things, and Michelle was talking earlier about innovation, sort of complexity aware programming, adaptive management, that's all been put to the test. And I think you've seen pretty phenomenal results with fewer resources or projects, that because of some of the technology shortcuts or innovations that Bob talked about, have been able to do things much more cheaply. So they're able to extend program, they're able to no cost extensions and the rest of it. But I think my ultimate fear is that there's, this will take over on sort of the authoritarian side, to the point where these budgets get sort of minimized, and we sort of also we get sucked into this sort of debate, or these sort of politicization of almost everything. And so that's my biggest fear, because I believe very strongly in this work, and I think now it's more needed than ever.
Thanks, Graham. I said it would be bleak. I'm getting depressed. Bob, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I won't pile on. Just picking up on a couple of themes. We're seeing backsliding when it comes to hunger, when it comes to poverty, and part of it is just due to the disruptions of systems that folks have kind of taken for granted as being able to keep running, that made things very difficult. But we've seen the pivoting that Graham's referring to. One of the concerns we have is whether or not the recovery will at first contribute to increased inequality. Folks who are better able to take advantage of technology, folks who have better access to financing for investment purposes to finance some of those pivots, folks who are more established and not necessarily plugged into the concerns and the observations and the experiences of the last mile, have a leg up in the recovery and in that pivoting. We've seen lack of inputs manifest themselves in terms of folks going back to really low yield seeds. In some cases, we've seen smallholder families eating next year's seeds in order to maintain. So that question of inequality in the recovery, when we get this disease under control, is one we're really going to have to pay attention to and tackle. And the other is, how do we deal with the very real needs of government transfer and support in countries that have been destabilized, in places where authoritarianism and populism may be cutting into the ability of public services to deliver. So there are. I'm confident that the recovery is there. I am made positive by the pivots I have seen and the engagement by some of these more connected folks to make sure that they're plugging into the more vulnerable communities. But it's going to take a bit more work.
Okay, thank you all. I mean, that was dispiriting, and it had to be, because I think the reality is that the world was not already on track to reach the SDGs, and this pandemic is setting us back, and that's just a hard reality. And I appreciate your clear-eyed comments on that. Let me try to rescue us a little bit with a more of a silver lining kind of question, and let me ask you, what good do you see coming from this pandemic, either in opportunities that it presents us as development professionals to do our work better, or in the ways that populations around the world can be galvanized to pay attention to things that matter that they may not have paid attention to before. So if you can see any positive coming from this, either in terms of programming or the ways we deliver programming, it would be interesting to hear about that. I'm gonna shake the lineup again and maybe start with you, Graham, this time.
Definitely, yeah, and for sure, I think. And there are a few. I think the biggest one for me is I think there's been a, just a shared experience among really the entire world. But I think if you're talking about if I could just for our organization that works, I think there's sort of a shared experience of what's happening. And I think having that leads to sort of a unity of purpose that I think you always try to have that. But I think the amount of sort of defining of that shared mission, that shared purpose, I think is as we look at the trends that some folks were just talking about in terms of the direction, I think this pandemic has been less of a catalyst and more of an accelerator of the trends that have been going on for several years. And so I think the ability of our sector to engage with those trends, I think in our organization, for example, I mean, we have our programs in Nepal and Afghanistan have been continuously running for 20 years. And so they've been through all kinds of earthquakes and humanitarian crises, wars, coups, et cetera. And I think, it's sort of, as we reach back into our old sort of toolboxes in the closet, we realized as an organization, those of us who've been as an organization for a little while, that we actually had these old tools and processes that actually work pretty well in this kind of environment. And so I think, I think what's always required is that you do have that sort of connectedness. And I liked what Olivier was saying about breaking down some of these, these barriers between sort of the home office and the field. But I think it's just as true at all levels. And so I think, again, I think this trend is sort of the acceleration of this connectedness that we have as a sector, but also as a humanity. And in our case, it's been an opportunity to use the tools not just to connect our staff, but to connect our partners, to connect our sort of our collaborators in the field, even across countries. And so there's a lot of work that my colleagues have been doing, in sort of the peace building and CVE space, working, to sort of train and empower a network of local peace builders. And so my colleagues have been able to sort of connect sort of our different country programs and have these sort of face-to-face and over Zoom in ways that they're sort of then empowering one another to continue the work themselves. And so I think there was so much that was in place at the beginning of this, that I think if we take this experience that we are all experiencing together and really find ways to, well beyond this, continue to find that shared rationale or reason, I think that will help incredibly. And the final point would just be around sort of just human beings, a point I made earlier. But I think in terms of staffing, we have Michelle was saying, I mean, my colleagues in the field are the reason that I wake up in the morning, and their commitment to this work and their ability to do that, I think, they've grown manifoldly. So the ability to be able to keep staff, train staff, empower staff, I think that's the part that I hope that we really continue to prioritize and put funds towards, even sometimes at the expense perhaps of some of the activities. I think that's been one of the success factors this year.
That's great. That makes me think of a question that if we have time, we'll return to at the end, which I'm curious about in your organizations of onboarding new staff during this time of isolation. I think it presents all kinds of different challenges in terms of inculcating people with your corporate culture and that sort of thing. But let me turn next to Olivier. You already talked a little bit about, I think, some of the positive things that you've seen coming from this remote working environment. But what else do you see long-term good maybe that we can pull from this crisis?
Well, I think, working from home, of course, even in the US and in Europe, it was there before COVID, not to the same extent, but it was certainly almost absent in Nigeria, where I am, and a lot of other developing countries. It was just not something people did. And, a lot of our staff, prior to COVID, had to drive 1-2 hours in the morning and another 1 or 2 hours at night to get back to their house. And so suddenly we freed up 2 to 4 hours in their day. And so what I'm hoping is that, beyond COVID, we'll be able to maintain, we've shown that we've been successful in the field, in a place like Nigeria, working from home, given all the tools that are in place. And so if we can continue this and allow staff to keep working from home when appropriate, I think we'll make them happier and we'll make them more productive. As far as we're concerned here, we're actually moving to a much smaller office next year, and we'll have staff continue to work from home indefinitely. And I hope that USAID and other owners will welcome these arrangements. We're actually also opening up offices, and we've been asked to pivot and start working in the Middle Belt, in another part of the country. And COVID has really changed our approach to starting up and our staffing arrangements. So we have people that will just work from home in these new locations, and that will save us the trouble of opening up a physical office, and will be, I think, just as effective. So I think that's really, for me, the positive side of things, is I think we'll develop more flexible working arrangements for our local staff and our local partners, and ultimately be able to retain talented people and be more effective. Thanks.
That's interesting. I also, in my career, have seen the long hours and long commutes that local staff have to endure, to get to the office and to get home in the evening. But I wonder, as folks, just a follow up to you, Olivier, as folks shifted from working in the office to working at home, were there challenges in terms of the tools that they needed? Did everyone have the computers and the internet access that they needed to be effective from home? And if not, what did you do about that?
Well, no, we gave everybody a laptop. I think a few people we had to give laptops to, but I think we were already moving to a setup where people had laptops. We canceled our office internet subscription, and we used the money that we saved to give people more data on their phones. So they were able to, we gave them as much gigabytes of data as they needed to work, even if I'm sure they use some of that to do their own personal stuff, and that's okay. So I think, some people use their transportation allowance to buy more fuel for their generators. Of course, with COVID came a lot of issues with childcare all over the world, including in Nigeria. So some people worked at night while their kids were sleeping, and we accepted that. And so I think not everyone appreciated. Some people actually still prefer to come to the office, and that's okay. But I think the key word here is to be flexible and welcome any arrangement that makes staff happy and productive.
That's great. Thanks for those additional details. Bob, what about you? What do you see good coming from all of this?
Well, building on Graham and Olivier, I do think the world got smaller. We recognized how we could communicate more effectively across distances, how we could engage with people in ways that we thought were only possible face to face. So travel budgets may be smaller in the future, and headquarters rent parts of the budget as we look at how can we be more efficient in how people work together with technology. But I'd like to throw out two more themes. I do think that as we've been looking at this question of how do we implement our projects, and what are our donors looking for, and what are implementers looking for, the increased attention to appreciating how systems work, how they get disrupted, the importance of local engagement with actors across the board, I think that got elevated. I think we shone a light that these are more sustainable in the face of shocks, and resilient in the face of shocks. So the impact of our work that's tied to our missions, I think got a stronger encouragement to be more facilitative and engaging with local actors, to not map out a plan that doesn't doesn't respond to conditions, but you keep reporting on your progress against a plan rather than progress against impacts. And I'm hopeful it'll change the types of monitoring, evaluation, and learning that we do, with a greater ability to capture short-term information that allows us to redirect and stay on track with the impacts we're really fighting for, rather than less frequent reporting on, we said we'd do this, and here we'll prove we did it, and moving more on an impact focus from a CYA focus.
Great, thanks, Bob. Michelle, when I give you a chance to answer the question too, and then we do have some questions coming in from the audience, so we'll turn to those next. But what from your perspective can we pull from this that'll make us better?
Thanks, Wade, and I'll be brief so we can get to those questions. I agree with what my colleagues say. I think a positive has been really the sense of, being one global community. I think we've been talking about the world getting smaller and us engaging more. I think that's definitely one of the positive aspects that's come out. And I agree with the flexibility with regard to work, because we do need to recognize that even if people have the technology at home, in some cases, when people are at home, because of their positions, their roles within the household, maybe they're not expected to work if they're sitting at home. And so they have to find creative ways to do that. They have to find spaces to do that. And we need to be flexible. And so we see that in the US as well as in countries abroad. Resilience, Bob, you just brought that up. I think that's really important. I think that there's going to be greater focus on resilience. And as you mentioned, the systems thinking, really working through local actors. And I think that the more as we do any type of development, when we think from the very beginning about the end of a project and ensuring that sustainability, but ensuring everything we're doing is really building and developing that resilience and protection from various types of shocks. I think that'll be very important. And also just the growing realization of the importance of public health. That's just a very basic one, that I think is coming out of here. So, and scientific collaboration. So I'll stop there so that we can get to those questions, but happy to speak more.
Great, and I appreciate that. So we have three questions now, actually. One of them I think is not too complicated, and the other two are you could write a thesis on each of them. So let me do the one that I think is a little less complicated first, and we'll pick maybe one of the others to end on. But so this first question, I think, Bob, you sort of mentioned travel and travel budgets. So we have a question about how do we think the need for travel will change long term. And I don't know if all of you need to answer that, but Bob, maybe since you brought it up, and any of the others of you are welcome to chime in. What do you think this pandemic and the response to it means for the way we will or won't travel in the future?
I think the needs will be viewed as smaller. I won't say that they'll evaporate. I don't think this was the ideal situation where all travel has frozen. There is a value to face-to-face, but I think we were able to see and understand how distance engagement could be effective, where its limits are. I'm sure we'll start to see that as well. And travel will need to be able to link staff in fields with participants in more remote areas, but less frequently if we're engaging with local actors. And similarly, home office staff with folks in the field as well. Great.
Any of you other three have something additional? Michelle, I see you unmuted.
I miss being in the field, though, I've got to say. So I agree. I absolutely agree that we don't need as much, short-term technical assistance. We don't need to fly out in and out right? As much as at times we may do. I think a lot of us already are working with those local teams, but being there is important too, and really understanding the context within which people live day to day and do their work day to day is really important as well. But I do think it'll decrease.
Good. All right, so we have about 5 minutes left, and I have a doozy of a question here. I'm gonna read it. It's a multi-part question, and we'll see what we can do with it. The questioner has said, given the dire situation, what beyond incremental adaptation, working harder, faster, what disruptive, non-incremental approaches can you envision to revolutionize the development sector? And then specifically, what are ways to decolonialize development? So hard question. Where are some disruptive, non-incremental things that could happen? And then this very, I think, relevant question about sort of the colonial nature of development and what can we do about that? So I'm gonna let you volunteer if one of you would like to take a shot at that first, Michelle.
Okay, here's a shot, and then other people chime in. So disruptive, it's not necessarily new, but it's new for some countries. Disruptive could be e-commerce, right? It could be things that are really leading to allowing to be more inclusive in terms of economic growth. And this may not be what the questioner was asking about, but I think bringing in more small, medium enterprises, micro enterprises, giving them a platform in which they can work. But the decolonial, cannot even say it, but I think that we're doing that already. And we've talked a lot today about local actors, local teams, listening, engaging, supporting community efforts, working at all levels within a country, but really relying on the innovation that's coming from those countries and our supporting and facilitating. So I think that is happening. And I will pause.
That's good. How about you gentlemen? Any thoughts on that topic? Graham.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think the first question, the travel question, is also sort of a euphemism for that as well. I think if there was a very clear trend, towards less international, less TTA, less backstopping, less sort of flying back and forth. So I think that was already on the being greatly reduced, and I think the abilities of a lot of the field teams and programs without that of the last 6 months is almost the old adage, working yourself out of a job. And so I don't think we've worked ourselves out of jobs per se, but I think it sort of shut the door behind us a little bit on some of the top downness of it. I think we still need to find that balance between the accountability and the oversight and the technical, at the beginning of projects and sort of the need for that those sort of field and HQ connections. But I think we started a few programs this year, new programs in the midst of this, and one of them was the result of a pretty long sort of development process, co-creation, and a lot of the mandates of that co-creation process, forcing really establishing local partners, investing a lot of resources up front in sort of having the right people who are already in place and could be activated within 72 hours. We were just getting ready to start that project, and then the pandemic hit. So there was some concerns that whether we would be able to do the work, and so we had to sort of almost resubmit the whole project. But it was all of the aspects that were baked into that process, many of which I think are often maligned and rightfully so. But I think we need to be really looking at that and feeling that difference. And I think that ties into some of the notions of historical aspects of colonialization. But I think finding that balance is really important, because to Michelle's point, it always needs to be there. But I think it's forced us, when you can't get there, you have to, and you sort of ask them, well, why didn't we insist on that to begin with? And so there's some honest, I think, self-reflection that all of us are having to do.
I think that's right. So we really only have about a minute or so left. Bob and Olivier, it's such an important topic. We could have a whole panel, I think, on just this issue. But do you have any nuggets to close us out with? Bob, how about you first?
I think we've been moving to looking at more of a systems orientation to how do we solve these development challenges, and when I say we, I mean collectively, and the elements of that really engaging in definition, not just co-creation on solutions, but definition of the problem with local actors, so that they're bringing in their local perspectives, and it's not a uniform local perspective, but they're multiple local perspectives. Understanding what the root causes behind it are, so you're not just rolling out a solution that you've rolled out before. Engaging them in a co-creation process on grants and on partnerships. These are things that we've been moving into, to the extent that we really do relinquish some of this sense of there is a solution, there is a plan, we'll implement the plan, we'll report on that, and we'll stay on track. But really be able to say, wait, there are multiple voices here. The definition needs to be done broadly, and the engagement needs to continue in the face of a changing reality. That's a different type of project than we've implemented at grade that I've seen over my career.
Thanks, Bob. I think we're a minute over. Olivier, do you have something trenchant that you could add? And if you want to pass, that's fine too, and we can wrap. But I'd love to hear from you.
Well, 15 seconds. I think, empowering, decolonizing development is a function of power, and empowering our local partners. We've talked about that a lot. I still think there's room for people from the West, the US, Europe, to come to learn firsthand and be present to learn. There's a lot of benefit to that. So I don't think we'll have better international development if we just all stay in our home countries. I think we do need to come here, learn the language, be with the people, and co-create and learn and bring this knowledge back. So there's space for that as well. And thank you all for this great panel discussion.
That's great. We're going to wrap it here. I have enjoyed this hour immensely. I can't think of 4 smarter people to have spent my time with. So thank you all very much for your wisdom and insights, and thanks to all the participants for tuning in.